Welcome back to another episode of the Fox and Buds show. Today we're talking with our guest, Chuck Berendes. Chuck, right off the bat, could you just kind of tell us about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I think probably most relevant to our discussion here is I'm a immigration attorney in um, southwestern Wisconsin. I've been doing this for about 17 years. I'm focused mostly on family-based immigration. I do some employment stuff. Um, yeah, I'm married. I got a couple kids. I got 5 chickens in my backyard.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So the price of eggs isn't going to affect you as much as other people, probably.
The price of eggs does not affect me at all. I had no idea that these eggs would become such a prized commodity.
Dude, when our government collapses, you'll be the richest man in our nation at that point.
Yeah, I sent some over to my neighbors this morning, and my neighbor, he texted back. He's like, "I thought we were gonna have to take out a loan to keep eating eggs." So yeah, I don't know.
I'm golden. Okay, so moving on, I'd love to know more about your academic background and career path that brought you to where you are today. Like, why is it that you chose to do what you do, and kind of how do you end up here? And, you know, what can other people do to follow in your steps if it interests them?
Yeah, so I went to law school at St. Thomas in Minneapolis. There's really no it's not like being a doctor where you'd have to have like a bunch of science background. I mean, you can get into law school. I was an English major, so you can get in. You have to take a test, but you have to go to college. So if you've been to college and you want to go to law school, that's a possibility for you. Um, Law school is a little bit of a different experience where it's 3 years long, and I believe for the first half, definitely for the first year, and I think for the next semester and the second year, you don't pick any of your classes. So everybody in America is doing the same stuff. So then later in your law school experience, you can start to select classes that are interesting to you based on what you think you're going to do when you get out. Immigration is a pretty uh, specialized practice area. So there was one class offered at the time about immigration, and I took it. And then when I got out of law school, regional social service agency, Catholic Charities, was looking to start a legal immigration program to help people in Western Wisconsin with their immigration applications. And so they hired me, I mean, pretty quickly, maybe, I don't know, a matter of weeks, I suppose, after I got out of law school. And I started that program. So that was kind of, I suppose, maybe a unique way to get started. There was nobody there before me. I moved into an empty office with a computer. And, I just remember that first day looking around and being like, we're going to have to buy some books. I mean, it's just, there was no program before. And so I did that for 10 years and really built that up, hired some folks. In the nonprofit world, you can get accredited through the Department of Justice to give immigration advice, legal advice, if you're not an attorney, which at first I thought was really weird, like, oh, if axe murderers get attorneys, but immigrants don't. And my opinion on that changed really quickly when I realized that there's hundreds of smart, dedicated people around the country giving high quality legal advice to thousands, probably tens of thousands of immigrants who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. And organizations like Catholic Charities or other kind of community-based nonprofits don't have the capability, the capacity to hire 3 attorneys, let's say, but they can hire a couple paralegals who can go through this accreditation process. And so that's what we did. So for a while there, we had three, I think, accredited representatives. There's two right now who are really busy still. So built that program up, and then over time I moved on, and so I'm in a little private practice now in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I still do provide a little oversight for Catholic Charities with their accredited representatives. But yeah, I'm doing lots of fiance petitions and green card applications for spouses of U.S. citizens, and a lot of naturalization right now, where I think people are who maybe were comfortable with their green card before, I kind of feel like, well, I'm eligible to become a citizen. Now's the time. So I'm doing lots and lots. I bet I did as many in the last 2 months that I would probably generally, maybe not quite in a year, but a lot more than generally in a 2 month span. But yeah, and then I do some kind of really specific employment-based stuff. So I work with a large hog farm operation, and they have a specific visa that's available. And I, through a series of events, have become kind of a expert in religious worker visas, where I don't even know if there's 100 lawyers in America who know about that. I think that'd be probably kind of a lot. Maybe I'm underestimating, but I don't think I'm underestimating by much. So immigration is an interesting deal. Like, there's, in Western Wisconsin, there's me and maybe two other lawyers. Well, more in Central Wisconsin, there's none. Way up north of Wisconsin, there's none. The rest are in Madison or Milwaukee, and Minnesota is similar, where there's immigration attorneys in the Twin Cities. There's maybe some in Rochester, but otherwise it's a pretty unique practice area, and there's just not a lot of people working in this field.
So kind of adding onto that, then there's kind of different subsets within immigration law, right? Different little niches, different types of immigration law. Could you kind of maybe just go over those briefly? I know you kind of told me about them when we spoke before last time, but I'd love to kind of cover that for the viewers.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I would say kind of the three areas are family-based being one, employment-based being another, and then deportation defense probably being the third. So I don't go in front of the judge. I have done that, but the immigration court is either in the Twin Cities or Chicago, and people generally are going to have multiple hearings. And I just, earlier in my career, thought this isn't really very efficient. Why am I driving back and forth for this one case? So I really focused, well, in Catholic Charities also, when I was with Catholic Charities, they're not doing employment-based stuff. If you're an employer, you should have enough money to pay an attorney and not be using a charitable organization to help with that. So I focused on the family-based side. And there are, in some ways, they're employment-based and family-based are analogous. You have to have a petitioner. So if you were in the family-based side, you'd have a family member, a spouse or a parent or a fiance. And on the employment-based side, you'd have an employer, and the petitioner would have to meet certain requirements. You'd have to, if you're on the family side, demonstrate that you're a United States citizen, and well, that you're eligible to marry, and so on and so forth. And if you're an employer, you have to demonstrate that you're a bona fide organization, and in many cases you have to demonstrate that you've done made a good faith effort to locate a U.S. citizen employee. And then if you can't do that, now you're filing for an immigrant. But then deportation defense would be a whole different deal. So you'd be in the court arguing, the government would say this person's deportable for 1, 2, 3 reasons, and you would say, Yeah, but there's a defense to that, and you'd be arguing in front of the immigration judge, which is kind of interesting because it's an administrative court, so there's no jury. The judge makes all the decisions, and the rules of evidence are loosely applied. So if you watch court TV shows or movies based on trials, and you're familiar with all those objections for hearsay or leading questions or anything like that, that only applies in immigration court if the judge wants it to apply. So it's sort of it's a different deal.
That actually sounds really scary to be on the other end of.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it was tough, when you're new and you've spent this time learning about the rules of evidence and all that procedural stuff, and then those rules don't apply, or sometimes they apply and sometimes they don't. It'd be like, practicing basketball, and then sometimes you have to dribble, but sometimes you can not dribble, and they don't, but sometimes they want you to. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's inherently unfair by any stretch of the imagination. It's a different style, and you have to become accustomed to that. But in some ways it is probably faster. And again, there's no jury, so the judge is making those decisions. So yeah, it's a little bit of a different approach.
That just sounds wild. I'm not actually sure if you'd know this offhand, but do you know like when our nation first started kind of hammering down with immigration laws? Has it always been a thing? Is it more of a recent thing?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that in kind of broad strokes. I have done some research on this, but I don't have those notes in front of me. But generally, for the first 100 years of the United States, there really were no rules. And so if you were healthy enough to, make the journey, then that was really what it took. Then the United States enacted some rules that would prevent certain groups of people from entering, anarchists, prostitutes, felons, people likely to become public charges. So that'd be like people who would be likely to require government assistance. Small groups of people who would be excluded. Oh, if you had a communicable disease, I think people are familiar with Ellis Island, and if you were, they're testing for probably tuberculosis or I don't know what. But again, if you didn't have those, if those concerns didn't apply to you, if you were not a prostitute or you were not a felon or an anarchist, you could get in. So that's the time period where my family got in, and many people, certainly in the upper Midwest, that kind of 1870s to 1890s, there was a lot of immigration at that time, and those were kind of the rules. So, when people say my family followed the rules, that's true, I guess, but like in some cases there were no rules, so that doesn't say a lot. In other cases, the rules were a lot different than they are now. There was a period, I think in the 20s or the teens, where these kind of national quotas came about that I think people are kind of familiar with or maybe have heard about. So based on a census, I feel like it was the 1920s, but the government wanted to maintain the ethnic makeup of the United States at that time. So let's say there was, I mean, this is obviously not accurate, but just for easier math, let's say there was 100 people in the United States, and 17% of them were from Germany and 13% of them were from Scotland and whatever. So they'd be like, okay, 17 visas are going to be available for Germans and 13 visas are going to be available for Scots and so on. So we're going to maintain this ethnic mix. that didn't last all that long. And then in the 1952, the Immigration and Nationality Act was ratified, which is the rules that we operate under today. And those rules have become more complicated and stricter in a lot of ways over time. They got stricter after the Oklahoma City bombing in the mid 90s, which had nothing to do with immigration. They got stricter after 9/11, which I guess in some ways you could say did have to do with immigration. But those are the rules that, you know, created this family-based pathway and the employment-based pathway. So where for a long time, it was like, as long as that you don't have these, you know, black marks against you, as long as you're not a felon, as long as you're not an anarchist, as long as you're not a prostitute. But there was, you know, maybe 6 categories. As long as you weren't one of those things, you could come in. And now it's totally flipped on its head, where unless you have an established connection to the United States, you can't come in. And so for a lot of people, there's just no path forward. And I think that's one thing that I don't think the public really understands. I think the public thinks, well, you're just do it legally, get in line, fill out the forms, pay the fees, whatever. But there is no line for a lot of people. There is no fee to pay. There's no form to fill out. If you don't have a family member in the United States, I mean, for most people, that's the end right there, because unless you have an advanced degree or some skill and an employer to petition for you, you're not going to qualify for an employment-based visa. And so that's it. Then I guess, you know, potentially you could apply for asylum, but, you know, hopefully most of the world doesn't require asylum applications. I mean, that's kind of reserved for real dire circumstances. And certainly people do qualify, and there certainly are places where people would qualify. But, you know, if we could imagine a world, you would want a world where people didn't need asylum to escape from like extreme violence. But that doesn't change the fact that there are very limited avenues to come into the United States. And I'm talking about permanently, like green card here. I mean, of course, if you know, if you're from I don't know, if you're New Zealand or Japan or I don't care, Jamaica or whatever, and you want to like see the Grand Canyon, you know, you could apply for a tourist visa for sure. Or if you want to attend a university, you can apply for a student visa. So those things definitely exist. But I'm talking about like immigrate to the United States, not temporarily visit or temporarily attend school.
I got you.
Yeah.
So basically, to sum it up, it sounds like we basically went from having open borders to a little less than open borders, having some qualifiers, but still majorly open borders, to now it's a very, very complicated process that's just kind of getting more complicated as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fair way to say it. And I mean, I know open borders is kind of a charged language, but that's a fact. I
Yeah.
mean, we had open borders even more than that. We were encouraging immigration. So the I don't think what you said is controversial. That's true. So anybody who would want to say, you know, dispute that, I mean, it is true. The border was open, and more than that, we were encouraging people to come to the United States.
Wow, it's kind of crazy how things have changed. Would you
Yeah.
say now in the modern day, our like immigration process, even with how complex it is similar to maybe like other first world countries like, you know, Canada, Germany, you know, several European countries, Australia, just you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's similar in some ways, and it's hard for me to say for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment. I know a little bit about some of those countries, but I'm definitely not an expert, but I would say there are strict limitations in many of those places as well. But
Okay.
then there are different commitments to accept refugees, for example, at varying levels that the United States right now is not participating in that. So, yeah, different countries are taking a different approach. Yeah, definitely.
Maybe to word this all a little differently, then, do you think we could maybe make better good faith attempts at simplifying the immigration process here for our own country?
I think it'd be in the best interest of the United States to link the immigration process with data that we're already collecting to the market, to the labor market. I mean, people come to the United States to work, period. That's why they're coming here.
Mhm.
So we know where, like, the Department of Labor knows in great detail, down to the county level, what people are getting paid for what types of jobs and where there's shortages. And we could take a really technical approach to that. We're not doing that at all. We take the approach that we're protecting U.S. citizen employees. That's period. Okay, that's a very important goal of the system for sure. But we have to acknowledge that in some industries, there aren't enough U.S. citizen employees to fill those labor needs. And I, people will try to argue about that, but I don't. To me, it's just the facts on the ground support that conclusion that there aren't enough people to fill the work, the open employment. There's not enough people, and so they got to come from somewhere. And we have demographic data showing that the population is stagnating or shrinking in many places. And so if you want your economy to not stagnate or not shrink, you need to do something. And if, like,
Mhm.
the birth rate isn't the answer, then immigration, I don't know where else people come from. Those are the only two options I'm aware of. So, yeah, I think we need to take a serious look at this, but we've turned it into a culture issue. And
Mhm.
I don't think that's very helpful.
Yeah, in my opinion, it certainly seems over politicized when, like you said, we can use data and an actual like well thought out system to kind of make everything easier, for lack of better words.
Right.
To kind of give an example, in literally this past week, one of my favorite restaurants that I go to in Rochester, Minnesota, just got shut down because the two main employees they hire got detained due to an ICE raid.
That
And
happened.
the the boss, the actual owner of the restaurant, made a really eloquent statement, but he also added some data, which is we haven't really had anyone apply here for 5 years.
Yeah,
So like like who's gonna work there? They don't have any employees now.
right. Yeah, it's I've had a lot of people commenting that, oh, if we deported everyone that's eligible for deportation, that would open up employment opportunities for US citizens or drive up wages for US citizens. And I just don't I just don't if we assume that there's 11 million people working in the United States without documentation, where are the 11 million US citizens who are just waiting by the kitchen door of the restaurant, or waiting by the edge of the lettuce field, or waiting outside the dairy barn, just waiting for their
No.
chance? I just don't think that those people exist. And if they did exist, I think the farmer in eastern Minnesota or western Wisconsin would be more comfortable hiring people who speak the same language that the farmer speaks. But they're not doing that because I don't think those people exist.
Yeah, it just seems like people really have a misinformed opinion about what types of jobs are going to be available.
Right, right.
It's not the job they want. So, moving on to some juicier things though. I'd kind of love to know what you think about Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. If you have an opinion on that, if you feel like commenting on that. From my understanding, the president really can't use an EO to kind of circumvent the Constitution, for lack of better words there. And I remember we kind of both agreed in one of our previous conversations that it's kind of harmful to Trump's own base that enjoys cheap foreign labor, whether that's domestic or international, from getting stuff manufactured overseas, you know. So it's kind of just weird, in my opinion, to have this, like, for lack of better words, what can only, in my opinion, be described as political theater, theatrics going on when, you know, Trump, in my opinion, is smart enough and educated enough to know better and to know this is kind of just pointless.
Yeah, and I mean, what he understands about, U.S. constitutional law, I don't know, but
Hmm.
he has a lot of lawyers around him, and for those people to advise him that he could write an order that flies in the face of the Constitution and also flies in the face of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that uphold that provision of the Constitution. I mean, we've been operating under this understanding since the 1890s. The
Wow.
14th Amendment was ratified in the 1860s, and there was a Supreme Court decision in the 1890s. And the court specifically in its decision addressed these racial concerns um, that people were having, and made it clear that it didn't matter what your race was. If you were born in the United States, you were a citizen of the United States, period. And I think I have to sort of agree with you. I don't know what else you'd call it besides political theater. Everyone behind that order had to know that that was going to get slapped down immediately. And that's what happened. And so, what are the goals there? I'm not sure. I mean, I think it is exciting to a certain group of constituents, I suppose, that,
That's a polite way of putting it.
yeah, that maybe somehow this is going to, take America back to some imagined, glory time. But this is not, and even, I mean, I understand the conservative majority in the Supreme Court. I get all that, but I would just be shocked, like shocked. This is not a novel question. This has been resolved, and um, in some ways I'd be surprised if the Supreme Court even heard this case. This question has been answered, and so I don't know why they would answer it again. So it's a I don't know. I don't see that as a winner. I just don't see that one going forward.
Okay. So kind of going off of the last question, I was just kind of wondering, how do H-1B visas work? I've heard that term used a lot and I'm just unfamiliar.
So I know a little bit about it, but this is one of the employment areas that I don't do a lot of work in, and there's a couple
Mhm.
reasons for that. But one is it's a lottery, so
Oh,
way more employers file applications than visas are available, and so there's 2 days throughout the year where they release the visas and they're gone immediately, and so a lot of employers, I think, are like, what's the point? Like, why would I pay someone to file this petition? And then it's kind of a coin toss whether or not I'm even going to get one. But they are for specialty, like high skilled workers. I pulled up the USCIS page kind of while we took a break here. And, there's some language. The occupation requires theoretical and practical application of a body of highly specialized knowledge and attainment of a bachelor's degree or higher degree, blah, 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 right? So it goes on and on. The job must require a bachelor's degree or higher degree or its equivalent to perform the duties. So this is not for like kitchen staff or whatever. So it's highly skilled employees.
How are I guess I've seen things about this. I have no clue if it's factual, but do you know if the employer then is kind of in charge of that employee's immigration status from that point on while
Yeah,
they're
so I mean
working
that's
there?
sort of that is interesting with employment-based temporary visas in general. So there's this question about it's called portability. So are you stuck with that employer forever? And with H-1Bs and with the other temporary employment-based visa types that I'm familiar with, the answer is no, but it's not as easy. Like if I wanted to not be a lawyer anymore and I wanted to, I don't know, go be a bartender, I could just go apply and be a bartender, right? But if you're have an H-1B and you don't want to work for, this research firm anymore, you want to work for a different one, that's possible, but the new firm would have to file a petition for you. And so that kind of, I mean, that's a lot to ask of an employer, I think, well, because are they going to get it? Do they want to spend them? It's an additional investment
Mm-hmm.
for the employer that they wouldn't have with an American citizen. And again, some people say that's the point. That's great. Like it should be easier for Americans to get the job. And to be honest, that's fine. I agree with that. We should not develop a system that like squeezes Americans out. I
Mm-hmm.
get that. I'm okay with that's great. I mean, after all, this is like our government that's supposed to serve us. But I think we could be a little bit more nuanced in our application or our creation of rules so that the system is fair and functional in the best way that we can do it. I mean, people they'll shout at me about illegal's illegal all the time. Okay, well, that's great. So what do you want to do about it? I mean, in almost I've been trying to think of another example where you just say like, nope, it's over. It's over for you. For example, bankruptcies existed for the entire history of the United States. So we've understood that people can take a chance on a business and their business doesn't work. And that doesn't mean that we throw them in jail until they could pay their bills. Um, we've created a system that acknowledges like, look, I can't do it. I have all this medical debt or whatever the case may be. I can't do it. And we don't lock them up. We have a system that like we can resolve that and move on. We have people get in trouble for drunk driving, let's say. Okay, so for some period of time you can't drive, but not forever. Like at some point you'll get your driver's license back. And we think of ways to keep people moving forward, right? We
Mm-hmm.
make rules that we think to the best of our ability serve our society and all the multiple concerns there. But it's for some reason in immigration, people are like, no, these are the rules. The rules are the rules. Okay, I understand that, but we can change the rules if they're not working very well for us. And in this case, again, I mean, as we talked about before, I don't think that it's working very well, especially in the employment realm. It's not tailored very closely to the needs of employers.
Have you
And
heard of situations where an employer actually does like kind of hold that visa over the employee's head in a malicious way?
I don't know. I'm kind of outside of that.
Okay.
Like the employers that I work with, if there was, I think it would kind of go, at least the employers that I work with, it would kind of go the other way, where if they were having trouble with a employee, they'd want to distance themselves or like pull their petition more likely they would do that than say, you're stuck with me, you're going to work 18 hours a day and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, I think they're more concerned about, at least the employers I work with, they're more concerned, what if something happens? What if they don't come to work? Like, what if they somehow go rogue and they go to work for somebody else? What if they get in trouble while they're here? Am I responsible for that? Those sorts of things, not like I'm going to use this to punish you. Although,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could imagine a scenario where that would kind of be the case, especially in a highly competitive field. I mean, you could definitely imagine a scenario where that would be the case.
I've heard allegations and rumors, nothing more that I can prove about stuff like that happening. So had to
Yeah.
ask. Moving
Yeah.
on though, I gotta ask, seems like in his first term and now in this term, we read about raids happening more. But do you know if there's any like data that backs up if deportations and raids occur more or less in any given administration? Or is it something that's just increasing over time as the population around the world increases, thus meaning more people are probably trying to come here potentially? Like, is there any logic, rhyme, or reason to anything? Or is it just people kind of checking the numbers on this given week and using them to back up whatever political stance they have?
No, I mean, they're policy decisions. So different administrations take a different approach to that. Um, I haven't looked for maybe a week or so, but the Trump administration was definitely deporting more people than the Biden administration, but is maybe double as many. The last time I was able to find any numbers on that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Would you say that's more than like Trump's first term even and more than Obama or
I don't think it was more than Obama. And people, they'll shout at me about that, like, oh, I'm only upset about these things because it's a Republican and not a Democrat. And I mean, for me, it's like I'm not a time traveler. I wasn't making social media videos then. I'm making social media videos now. So I can't go back and make a video in the past. Um,
mm-hmm.
I think deportation is appropriate in some cases. I mean, um, I'm not that radical that I do think it's appropriate in some cases. Probably in many cases, it's appropriate. My concern is that we have shifting policy objectives, and on the one hand, we've allowed a certain situation to grow and flourish. And so I think there's kind of a fairness element where, okay, well, so we allowed that, but now we're not going to allow it. And again, I understand maybe that's not the winning argument. Maybe people say, who cares? The law's the law. Okay, that's fine. But I think we could think of other times where maybe the law is not applied evenly, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's kind of a fairness argument. But more than that, I think there's kind of a societal argument, a community argument, and an economic argument that, do these new aggressive policies really make sense? Do they benefit Americans? Do they benefit communities? Do they benefit employers? Do they benefit families? Do they benefit school districts? I think in many cases, the answer to those questions is no, they don't. And so then we're stuck with the law's the law or illegal is illegal. And I think that, stupid is stupid. Like, we could fix these things. We're not stuck with these laws until the sun consumes the earth. We could make choices to make different laws that would better serve our communities. And again, I don't think that it has to be chaos, and I don't think that there has to be no rules and the border doesn't matter anymore. I don't think that any of that stuff has to be true. But
Mm-hmm.
just saying, like, get them all out of here because illegal is illegal, well, I think that there's going to be numerous consequences. Well, first of all, I don't think it's realistic
Hmm.
that if that was somebody's goal, which it seems to me to be, people tell me that they believe that that should happen, that every undocumented immigrant should be gone. So, okay, if that really was their goal, and if I don't think that's possible. Just because we have these new policy objectives doesn't mean that we have 10 times more ICE enforcement agents. They didn't like, pop out of the ground. So we couldn't deport people at that rate before. And so as a nation, we're not able to deport people at that rate now. And so first of all, I don't think it's reasonable or like mathematically possible right now. Could we dedicate enough resources to make that happen? Sure, we could. I think it'd be hugely expensive, hugely expensive.
Hmm.
And then to imagine that we could just remove, let's say, 11 million people and feel no consequence whatsoever, I think is naive at best.
So kind of tailing off that, I really don't know how like an ICE raid works. Is there actually like a time and place where that's a necessity, or is it more of like a theatrical thing? I've heard some people argue for it and against it. One of the biggest arguments against it is that it's just a very public show of what's going on, show of power, maybe just a way to embarrass people, to kind of just come and make it seem like ICE is in your neighborhood, get people scared and riled up. And I haven't seen many people really argue for it when you can, in theory, just kind of go up to someone and arrest them in a calm, more peaceful manner if need be, you know?
Yeah, it seems to me. Oh, what was your first question? Is there a time and place where a raid would need to happen? I think the answer is no. And raids didn't happen for a long time
Oh,
because they are well, they're disruptive at least. I think they're dangerous. Um,
yeah.
I think that in the criminal context, you probably, if like local police had a arrest warrant for a dangerous person, I don't think they would wait for that dangerous person to be in a public place and then try to arrest them. I think generally they try to arrest them in their car or at their home and just reduce the possibility of like collateral damage or violence. But in immigration enforcement, for some reason, again, this hasn't always happened. Not all administrations have gone down this path. For a long time, it wasn't happening. Um, and really, to be honest, under the Trump's first term, I don't think that there was really this focus on workplace raids. I mean, people found it pretty distasteful in about 2007 when there were these big raids, and then little kids would leave their elementary schools and their moms and dads would be not home because they were swept up in these meatpacking raids. And I think people thought, Jesus, this
That's
is what
horrific.
this is kind of the outcome that we're going for. I think even people who were, you know, in favor of stricter immigration enforcement, I think there was overwhelming people found it to be distasteful. They were like, there's got to be a better way to do this than to like all of a sudden there's little kids walking home from school and their parents aren't home. So raids have not always been part of the toolbox. But the other thing that's interesting, if you look up on like the ICE website, part of the justification to them is they're protecting employees who are being exploited. So the people that they're putting in handcuffs, they're doing that. They're handcuffing people to protect them, which seems like a kind of mental gymnastics I'm just not really familiar with.
I'm
Um,
sorry, I'm laughing. Yeah, that's absurd. I
yeah,
mean, I gotta add my little 2 cents there too. Is irony the right word? I mean, there's something that I don't think we can ignore in the situation of arresting an immigrant at their workplace. Like if there's supposed to be these scary whatevers, how are we just going to ignore you're arresting them at their job?
Yeah, I think I think I have the same opinion, and the same thing with this removal of this sensitive areas. So for about 11, 12 years, there was a policy from ICE and Customs and Border Protection that they wouldn't arrest people in sensitive locations like schools or hospitals or churches or at funerals or weddings or places where children would gather was another one. Well, now they've erased that. And the
Oh,
borders are said that criminals are no longer safe in American schools or churches. And I have no idea what that means. Because as far as I could tell, so far, there have not been raids in schools or churches. So either that means there was no criminals there to begin with, which I believe to be the case, or what, they're lazy and incompetent. I I don't think there ever was a threat. I think what they want to do is make people uncomfortable. And I guess I'm not, I think, there's this whole thing where like tough guys don't need to talk about how tough they are. So I think when we take these sort of mean-spirited approaches, that's kind of tough guys talking about how tough they are. It's not my style.
yeah.
So, um, raids are a tool that certain administrations use for, I don't know exactly why, but I think your idea of a show of force is part of it. But I'm not a law enforcement agent, but I would think that if you're smart enough to figure out where a person goes to church or where they work, you've probably already figured out where they live. And so you could also go there and it'd be probably safer. But I don't know. I think the other draw for a workplace raid is there's probably the likelihood that you can scoop up some other people. That's probably a fun part of it for them. But
Interesting word choice.
yeah, but I think, but then I don't know what signal is that sending to other employers. I think some people would like to believe that, oh, well, then other employers should also not employ undocumented workers. Okay, that's great. But what are they supposed to do? Should they close their doors? Should they shut down their business? So I don't know. I don't really know what the objectives of those beyond kind of a show of force. I don't really know what the point is.
I have to follow off the other point you kind of made in this, which is, what actually does happen then if someone gets raided and they're detained and they do have a child or something? Do they get an opportunity to get their affairs in order? Like, what happens to the kid?
Yeah, so I'm not, again, like, since I'm not in the immigration, like the deportation court, I don't know exactly. Sometimes
Hmm.
people can be released with court dates. Right now, the administration is against this like catch and release, quote unquote, um, approach. So I guess they're planning to detain people until they can have their hearings, which, I mean, one is super expensive for taxpayers.
Fun.
Two is very disruptive for families. Um, so, I have been helping groups complete documents that you generally could, like I'm helping like 70-year-olds complete for power of attorney for finance. And in these cases, guardianship papers for their kids. And instead of the concern being, what if I'm in a car accident and I'm in a coma? Who's going to manage my finances? Or what if I have dementia? Who's going to manage my finances? The concern is, what if I'm deported? Who's going to sell my business? Who's going to sell my truck? Um, who's going to take care of all those things? Or what if I'm in a coma and I can't care for my children? Now, what if I'm deported or detained and I can't care for my children. Who's going to do those things for me? So again, I mean, if our only concern is illegal, then I guess who cares? Who cares? But I just think that that's it's just it doesn't seem like the best way to handle these things to me.
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to just cry. It's just that's senselessly just careless and almost inhuman. A lot of this. Um, Jeez. Um, Carrying on, here's a good one is, do you know where the majority of our like immigrants even come from? I know it's a huge misconception that they're like hopping the border from Mexico or swimming here and whatnot. And you even brought up 9/11, but as I recall, the terrorists that did that came from the Canadian border. So,
So well, yeah, some of those guys I think had visas to begin with. So I mean, it is true that a lot of people cross the southern border. I mean, that's true. And it's true also that a lot of people have come from other places in the world to the southern border. So like I understand the concern in some ways about like, okay, we got to have like some sense of what's going on. And I get that. That's I get that sentiment for sure. Now that being said, there's never, I don't believe in human history really been constructed like an impermeable border. So like the Great Wall of China, from what I understand, 1 million men died building that thing and it didn't last. So, you know, the Berlin Wall, people got over it, got under it, got around it. So, I mean, does that mean who cares? There should be no rules? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think we have to be kind of realistic in our expectations. And also, people come here to work. They come here to work. There are people who are shouting at me on social media all the time that we can't have all these folks come from wherever, and then we're just going to pay for their housing and pay for their food. That's not what people are coming here for. So people are coming from the southern border often, and they're coming to work. And again, I think if we matched our labor market more closely with visas that were available, that would slow all that stuff down. People aren't, I mean, often I ask people, how did you get to Sparta, Wisconsin? How did you get to Arcadia, Wisconsin?
mhm.
I mean, it might be shocking to folks, but like little 8-year-old kids in Guatemala don't sit around and be like, man, someday I'm going to Arcadia, Wisconsin. You just watch. I'm going to do it. I mean,
Wait, really?
people might have goals about, I'm going to go to Hollywood or something. The only reason that folks end up in those places is because they know with specificity that there is a job for them, not the prospect of a job, not maybe I could get a job, but my cousin called me and said, if you can get here, this farmer will hire you on the spot. And so they come directly to these places. They're not wandering around. They know they're coming specifically for a job. I asked a woman one time, she was 26 years old. She was, honest to God, she was probably 4'10". How long did it take you to get, she was from Guatemala. How long did it take you to get to Sparta? And she said 6 months. And I asked her, I said, did 6 months? That seems like a really long time. And she's like, yeah, I had to walk to Texas. So if you were an employer and I said to you, hey, I have an employee who's willing to walk, 1,500 miles and then take some sort of treacherous journey in the back of a van to come here and do the job that you want to be done for you. Are you interested in someone who's willing to sacrifice that much to work for you, who's that dedicated? Are you interested in a person like that? I think most employers would say, yeah, I'd take a person like that. But we don't have any mechanism. We don't have a mechanism to allow for that to happen. And so this woman knew precisely where she was going in the United States, and she walked for weeks, months to get exactly where she was going. So yeah, people are coming from a lot of different places. I would say Mexico, in a lot of these eastern Minnesota and western Wisconsin towns, a lot of folks are from Mexico, but you're seeing more folks from Central America now too. And then there's different pockets where there have been, refugee resettlement. So that's more, but that's intentional. So that would be like communities coordinating with the government to like take on a certain number of people. But just in terms of sort of whatever you want to say, like organic immigration, yeah, people are going where there's jobs, and they know for a fact that there's jobs, and they have family or friends who are there, and they're telling them that there's jobs. But yeah, it's not all people from Mexico, that's for sure.
Is it true that the majority of illegal immigrants came here legally and they just have a situation came up like a expired visa that made them an illegal? I've heard that argument brought up too as well quickly.
I don't know that I would say, I wouldn't feel super comfortable saying the majority of people do that. A lot of
Okay.
people do that. A lot of people. And then what's interesting is if you overstay a visa, that's not a crime.
Oh,
So when people are like they're all criminals, well, that's factually inaccurate. They're not all criminals. So that's an administrative violation. So, but yeah, a lot of people have overstayed a visa for sure.
where do you think the majority of illegal immigrants are coming from, if you have any knowledge on that at all?
Like what country?
No, not country, just like what's causing them to be qualified as an illegal immigrant? Like, is it just someone coming here undocumented, or is there other situations that people aren't thinking about when they think of that term illegal immigrant?
If I had to bet, I would say it's people coming without inspection, so entering
Okay.
without a visa. But I mean, there are lots of people who've overstayed. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Wow. My mind is still kind of reeling at how privileged our lives are here because we don't have to walk across countries just to get a decent job and have a decent way of life. That's crazy. It reminds me, my buddy had a foreign exchange student who was a good friend of ours from Colombia, and he was telling us about how much a Colombian peso is and how much he gets paid over there, and he could work 8 hours there and make not even what he'd make here in like a lot of work. And it's
Right.
just like he ended up coming here in the summers and stuff just to come here and work after that, after we all graduated as adults even. And it's just it really is mind-blowing and almost parallels some of the rhetoric I've heard with like the drug epidemic of, oh, we have a drug issue in America. But it's like, well, no matter who's supplying it, your demand is still there. You're still buying them all. So you can't blame everyone for supplying you. And that really does parallel with this foreign labor. Like you can say you hate it, but all the employers love it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think so. It's interesting. Because what now I've been kind of posting some stuff on social media, and then you get this reaction, and you hear these talking points, and I'm not watching those news sources, so it's interesting to me to hear what their talking points are. And one of the talking points is that liberals and employers want to maintain a slave labor class. And I've heard this enough now where I know this isn't, people aren't just like thinking this up on their own. They're hearing it somewhere. Well, first of all, I think that's ridiculous. Secondly, I don't think employers, for the most part, want this situation either. I think that, I mean, employers call me quite a bit and they want to normalize this. They're like, how do I get this guy a visa? And I'm like, you can't. There's no path forward. So they would prefer to have folks be legal, but there's no way to do it. And there's certainly no way to do it once they're in the United States and they're undocumented. So I mean, are there bad employers out there? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are bad employers out there who are taking advantage of people. But I also know that employers call me and they want to do the right thing. They want to treat their employees fairly and have them be comfortable and stable and safe. And there's not a way to do it. So, yeah, I don't know that I need to say this, but I'm not in favor of a slave labor class. And I
Hey,
think
it's
that
2025. You honestly might as well say it.
yeah. So going back to my previous statements, I think we need to do a better job of matching the market with our immigration policy and our immigration laws, but we've not done that. And I don't know that we have any appetite for that right now, in this current political climate.
So, kind of carrying off of what we've mentioned before, I just pulled up a news article by CBS News that's titled U.S. Sending Nonviolent Low Risk Migrants to Guantanamo Despite Vow to Detain the Worst There. Do you have any like knowledge about that one? I cannot understand why we would send immigrants to Gitmo, dude. That doesn't sound like a good thing at all.
No, and I saw that earlier today or yesterday or something as well. I mean, there's a couple concerns about that. Well, maybe more, but I mean, there's a couple things that are pretty obviously troubling about this strategy. One, it's super expensive, and like we're all going to pay for that.
Hey, Doge will cut that out eventually. No worries.
Yeah, it's funny they're not on top of that now, but incredibly expensive. And there were talks about detaining people at the Space Force base in Colorado, which is gigantic. And I don't know that the Space Force base is like, I don't think the X-Wings are ready to go yet. So there's lots of space there, but I didn't mean to make a pun. There's room on that base if they were to detain and process people there, which would be immensely more cost effective. So, okay, that's one thing. Of more concern to me is people are not entitled to constitutional rights if they're not within the jurisdiction of the United States. So the United States does have some history of detaining immigrants at Guantanamo Bay. However, historically, these have been people who've not reached the United States. So people who've kind of run into trouble in the open water and they were taken to Guantanamo Bay. Now, we could talk about was that a good idea or not, but one thing that's for sure is they were never inside the United States. So it's a different scenario. Now you're taking people who did have constitutional protection and then forcibly removing them somewhere else where they don't have constitutional protection. And what is the good faith argument for that? And I don't know. I don't know the answer, but
That's
it's troubling.
disturbing.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And how do we monitor that situation? How do they have access to attorneys? How do we know what those hearings? Is there going to be some sort of immigration judge at Guantanamo? Yeah, I don't see. And look, people could disagree with me on things, and I could disagree with people on things, and that's great. I know for sure I don't know how everything works. I don't have the right answer to everything. And I think we can come to better answers if we talk to each other.
Of course.
But I know for a fact that if, let's say conservatively, there's 11 million people in the United States without legal status. I know for a fact that the vast majority of those people are not threatening. They're not physically dangerous. And our own experience, our own senses can tell us that. I mean, you could drive to communities, it won't take you very long. You could drive to communities with huge undocumented populations and that have thriving elementary schools and thriving businesses, and it's not some sort of like deathscape. So our senses can tell us this is true, that there are millions upon millions upon millions of hardworking people who don't have immigration status, but they're not rapists and they're not murderers. And so what are we doing sending those folks outside of our jurisdiction so that we don't have to play by the inconvenient rules of the Constitution? I don't know what the purpose of that is.
Not like they respect the Constitution anyways.
Well, one thing I will say is, the border czar guy, I can't think of his name right now, Holman, I think, he was saying that these Know Your Rights seminars that are being put on by different community organizations or well-intentioned individuals have slowed down the ICE enforcement actions. And he made some statement about, people call them Know Your Rights presentations. I call them avoid arrest presentations. I think what he's overlooking is Know Your Rights means I'm going to explain to you how the Constitution works and how that affects you in this situation. And is that inconvenient if your goal is to detain people? Yeah, that's inconvenient. The Constitution often is inconvenient. But what's true, or what must be true, is while that bothers the border czar, the ICE agents must understand the limits and protections of the Constitution because they're respecting those things. So when people are, exercising their right to remain silent or demanding to see a warrant, apparently the ICE agents understand the Constitution does have authority and they can't just trample over these things because somehow it's slowing down their detention rates. So to me, that's encouraging. So even though some of these public figures find this inefficient or inconvenient, the agents on the ground understand the limits. So that's good.
Yeah, it is. So just to kind of backtrack a little, what are the steps? If I was going to get deported right now, ICE knocked on my door, I got arrested in handcuffs, what would happen to me?
That's a good question because they've expanded this thing called expedited removal, which used to be limited to within 100 miles of the border
Yep.
and people who have been in the United States for less than 2 weeks. Now this is expanded to everywhere in the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska.
Oh,
For people who have been in the country for less than 2 years. And so
wow.
the guidance that I'm seeing and that I'm telling people if they ask me is that if I had no current immigration status, I would carry something, probably more than one thing, that had clear evidence that I was inside the United States for more than 2 years. Which brings up another question. Should I myself be carrying my birth certificate with me because that's the only proof of citizenship that I have? And if I did carry my birth certificate, would it be recognized? Because now there's some question about which birth certificates are recognized. But expedited removal is now in effect for anybody that apparently that an agent believes is in the United States without authorization. And so I think that really that applies to everyone in the United States. And how do we know who's a citizen and who's not? Is it because of the way I look or the way that I talk? Because those things aren't really measurable and those things are not proof of my citizenship. So should I also be carrying my birth certificate? Because I could be questioned, I could be stopped, and quite possibly I could be removed from the United States because right now I have no proof in my wallet that says I'm a citizen of the United States.
That does happen, right? Legal citizens getting deported.
Sure it does. Now, I don't know. I mean, I would think that it's a low number. I mean, I could tell you from experience about a person who I helped get a green card who apparently didn't sleep with her green card in her pajamas. And then in the last round of raids, a decade ago or more, she ended up detained because she didn't have proof of her lawful permanent resident status when ICE came to the door at 11 p.m. or whatever it was. So then I get a call, she's in the jail, and I have to sort it out. Like, yeah, she is a permanent resident. Like, she needs to be released. So yeah, these things are not foolproof. And I mean, you could say, oh, am I being dramatic that I should carry proof of my citizenship? I don't know. I think it's dramatic that they can remove people who they suspect to be in the country without authorization, without a hearing in front of a judge. That's what the expedited removal part means. You don't get to have a hearing, they just take you away. So the steps of that, I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm sure, be detained somewhere for some period of time before you'd be put on a flight. And, now the administration is entering into third country agreements where you could be removed to a country that's not your country of origin. So that's also a complicating factor.
Man, it's kind of a heavy bit of info, man, for any of us that don't look overtly like a white American.
I hear
I'm
you.
adopted, so I'm kind of just waiting for them to reach the point of getting rid of all the adopted people.
Right.
Geez, I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I really want to hammer this one too. Do you know, or do you even believe if it's an accurate statement to say that immigrants in other countries aren't, sending us their best, and that immigrants are just bringing a bunch of crime and drugs and other horrible things like assault and sexual assault with them? And, is that true? I know you've already kind of commented on that, but I really want to make it very blunt.
Well, first of all, I don't think that it's a concerted government effort by another nation state to make some organized, let's send these people to the United States.
So they're not driving busloads of immigrants to our border?
No, nope.
Even when I read that in the news, that's just bullshit.
I mean, the people I talk to, that's not how they got here. So, I mean, these are individuals making choices for what they perceive to be the best interest of their family, in the same way that my ancestors made choices when they were starving in Ireland, or leaving like war-torn, what would that be, like some sort of Victorian era Germany? I don't know what that period would be called in Germany, but they were making choices based on their safety and their ability to feed themselves. So I don't agree, one, that nations are sending us anyone. I think people are coming. Nations aren't sending us anyone. And secondly, we have statistics on this, and we know that immigrants are committing crimes at a lower rate than natural born citizens. And if you don't believe in statistics, again, I urge you to trust your senses and go to some of these places where that that there's a lot of immigrants. And you're not going to see like gun battles on the street. What you're going to see are really healthy schools and vibrant business communities. I think we could trust our senses on, if we were overrun with murderers and rapists, we wouldn't have to like look into the like national news to figure that out. We would know, but that's not the experience. Now, also, I'm not naive, and I don't want to be callous. Like, some undocumented immigrants have done terrible things, and that's a fact. And some Americans have done terrible things, and that's also a fact. But those outlying terrible events can't guide our policy moving forward. Those are terrible outliers, and we can know that through statistics, and we can know that through our own experiences.
I can only hope that the most xenophobic of our populace somehow see this and take it upon themselves to immerse themselves in a diverse situation where they might actually gain that experience and knowledge.
Well, I mean, the reality is, you know, you don't have to drive to some like major metropolitan urban center. I mean, there are little towns around America that are half immigrants, and like drive through one of them and
Mhm.
see how scary it is, because it's not.
So carrying on, I'd love to learn some like common issues that people have when it comes to like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know the terminology here, but when it comes to like maybe maintaining their legal status, like what are some common hiccups that a person coming here face and need to, educate themselves about to help mitigate, avoid, or get out of,
Well, first of all, I would say, like going back to our previous discussion, for a lot of people, there is no way to obtain legal status. And so
Mhm.
those folks are if we don't adjust our system,
If
they're
there's no
just
way
gonna,
to get immigration status, then is the American dream kind of a pipe dream? Is it just bullshit marketing tactics at that point? Like
well, I mean,
now,
it's certainly limited, right? I guess some people say the American dream's for Americans. I think that causes
fair,
a whole nother set of problems in some ways. Like my we don't have to go back that far, that many generations, and my ancestors weren't Americans either. So,
same.
um, and again, like there are going to be limitations. I understand that. America obviously can't contain the entire population of the planet. I get that.
Hmm.
That being said, I think there is a perception amongst Americans that every person on the planet would prefer to live in America. And I know from my experience, everyone on the planet would generally like to stay where they're from if it were safe and they could feed their families. They'd stay where their moms and dads are, and they speak the language and they know understand the religion and they like the music and they're familiar with the food. Everyone would do that. But when they're pushed to a certain point, people will give up what's familiar for their safety and the safety of their children. Um, so okay, for a lot of people, there is no way to get status. So those people are stuck right now unless we can figure something out. But then if you have status, it may be temporary if you're a visitor or a student or you have some sort of temporary worker visa. Um, those are interesting questions then sometimes too. It's like, do I allow that to expire, knowing that I'm probably never going to be able to rectify that in the United States? Or do I go back to my country knowing that, I mean, in some cases, I'm putting myself at like physical danger. So those are tough discussions sometimes. But then, the other thing is if you have, let's say you got a green card through a marriage and now your spouse is abusive. So do you have to stay in that marriage to maintain that green card? Fortunately, the answer is no. And fortunately, there's a mechanism for, it's called the Violence Against Women Act, which applies to men as well. But we can all understand, unfortunately, more women suffer at the hands of their spouses than the other way around. But there is that mechanism does exist. But now the question is, do you know about that? And then I've talked with women whose abusers were pretty crafty in their deception and keeping information away from them. So it took them a long time before they just couldn't take it or found somebody to get them, found a little bit of information or somebody to be an ally or whatever. So, but like, yeah, your marriage can be an issue because that's like your tethered to the United States. And in some ways, it's like, well, go home then. Okay, that's great. But then what happens when you have a kid? Now you just like go home and leave the kid with the abuser or whatever. I mean, it's not rational. And then, you bring up another point about employment. So now you're working here, and then that's temporary too, or things aren't going very well, or things are going great and the employer's happy with you and you're happy with the employer, but the way the system's set up, and I'm dealing with this right now, the visa is going to expire and there's nothing they can do about it. Their only recourse is to leave the United States for a year and reapply. And it's like, this is all the best we can do. Okay. I mean, so it's highly technical. Each pathway to a visa is unique. There's so many different visa types, especially for temporary visas. And then there's so many pathways, unique pathways to a green card, that often when people say, well, I knew a guy who did this, or my cousin did that, it's like, okay, but that, it's like, even like, are your taxes the same as your neighbor's taxes? Like, probably not. We're all paying taxes. So it's a technical, tricky endeavor. And for some people, there's no way to fix it. For a lot of people, there's no way to fix it.
Jeez. Honestly, the gravity of that is just kind of depressing.
Yeah.
Could we, I know it's going to be complicated, but could we briefly just kind of go over the process to become a legal citizen? But I'm guessing that is kind of answered by what you just said, is it's very hyper specific on the individual situation.
Well, I mean,
Would you overall consider it a difficult process? Is it a long process? I mean, I know back in high school, and I was fortunate enough to go to a school that actually was very critical of our government and very woke, for the lack of better words. They actually made us take the citizenship test just to show us how kind of hard it could be.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that's important for people to recognize is when they talk about a pathway to citizenship, what they're really talking about is a pathway to a green card. You can't become a citizen without a green card.
Okay.
So, assuming that you have a green card, now we can talk about the citizenship requirements. So, generally, you'd have to have your green card for 5 years. If you're the spouse of a U.S. citizen, you have to have it for 3 years. You have to be physically present within the United States for at least half that time. You have to be in the jurisdiction where you're applying for at least 30 days. So, if you're in Minnesota or whatever state you're in, you have to be there for a certain amount of time to apply. And then you have to be a person of good moral character. And so it's really probably impossible to define what good moral character is, but it's pretty easy to define what bad moral character is, or maybe I should say lack of good moral character. So if you've committed crimes, some crimes you can never be found to be of good moral character again, which is probably acceptable, right? If you're a green card holder and you murder someone, there is no amount of time that goes by before you can become a citizen. And in fact, you're going to lose your green card anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But
Yep.
Other things, I think we could agree, like, shouldn't penalize somebody forever. So, like, one drunk driving arrest, for example, is within that 5-year period is probably not going to prevent you from becoming a U.S. citizen. But when you start stacking things up, it is going to prevent you. Or if you have a criminal case that's open, that's going to prevent you. And I think all that stuff is fine. Like, citizenship is the end of the road. That's the whatever you want to say, the gold standard. So we want to encourage people to be good people. Like, okay, that's fine. So, but those are kind of the rules. You have to have your green card for so long, stay out of trouble, be present in the United States. So the harder question is, how do I get a green card? Because again, for a lot of people, that's just not going to be an option. And so then, of course, citizenship is not an option.
So This is going to be vague. And I know you got a job and you got to get paid, so you don't have to give a bunch of free information out if you don't want to. If anything, just plug your office, you know? But do you just have any basic advice for anyone wanting to become a citizen that maybe is watching this video from outside of our borders? Or is the first honest to God piece of advice is just contact a lawyer?
Well, so again, you got to figure out how are you gonna, is there a way you're gonna get a green card? And so
Okay.
you have to think about that first. But if I would say for sure, if you have a green card and you're eligible to apply for citizenship, I mean, I've always said this to people, like apply as soon as you're eligible. And I think now more than ever, just because there's so much uncertainty about what might even be attempted, legally, or what maybe, yeah, attempted, I guess. But people are generally nervous because there's a test, and I understand that. But the test is probably, I would say, fourth grade level.
Okay.
So if you don't study, you're gonna fail, because I don't care how smart you are, you can't like logically intuit the Chief Justice of the United States name. This isn't math. You just have to study and know what his name is. That's all there is to it.
Yep.
Or you can't like be really smart and just know what your state senator's name is. You have to study and know the answer to that. So, but I've helped tons of people with this, and 2 people ever have failed, and both of them told me they didn't study at all. And so
Okay.
personally, for me, I changed the way that I do things, because I charge people a flat fee. And then I said, if you fail the test and I have to go back there with you, I'm charging you again, because that's ridiculous. I drove all the way there and you told me you didn't even study. Like, what's the point in this?
Yeah.
So, but I've had people who have very limited educational backgrounds and a somewhat limited grasp of the English language. I mean, you have to be able to speak English, but I'd say I've had people who are like, basically conversational, who study and pass. And it can be, you definitely can do it. Definitely can do it.
Is the process something that can be done without a lawyer?
Oh yeah, citizenship for sure. I think the main thing, I mean, I think I'm helping people for the most part with citizenship. For the most part, it's like peace of mind. Like, I tell them exactly what to expect. I manage all this stuff. I put the application together. If there's any requests for anything, I take care of that. But
Mm-hmm.
by the time you get to you're eligible for citizenship, they already know. They already know everything. If you have problems, they already know. So I think citizenship, most people just want somebody to tell them it, like, we're gonna do it this way and it's gonna be just fine. But I would say citizenship is probably the least complicated thing that I help people with. Again, because everything else that I help people with comes before citizenship. So you got to like clear all these other hurdles before you're even eligible. So once you get to the citizenship part, if I had to say, if you were going to do anything on your own, I would say it would be that. But that being said, that's the thing that I charge the least for as well. So I'm trying to be realistic with that too. But I think people are nervous, super nervous, because there's a test. And so, I took federal income tax in law school and I passed, and I hated every minute of it. And my wife and I pay an accountant each year to help us with our taxes, even though I could figure this out, but I don't want to figure it out. I'd much rather pay somebody. And so I know, like, that guy knows what he's doing and he just helped me. I paid him a couple $100, and I don't have to worry about the laws changing and this or that or the other thing. Like, he did it. So, and I think that's how people often feel with citizenship. Like, okay, Chuck helps people with this every day. I don't have to worry. That's the main thing. Eligibility, every once in a while, you have some weird eligibility thing where somebody was convicted of some crime 7 years ago. Is that going to stop them? Is it not going to stop them? Blah, 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 blah. But for the most part. It's like, you're a good person. You've had your green card for 4.5 years. Start studying for the test.
We're almost done here. I guess I just kind of want to reiterate, if someone right now who's thinking about calling you or hiring you, how should they reach out to you?
Probably the best way, most of the people that I work with are employed, so they're often working when I'm working. So a lot of times people are reaching out to me in the evenings or on the weekends. So most people reach out through email. So you can find that on the Pittman and Pittman website, or my email is just my first name, Chuck at pittmanandpittman.com. There's 2 T's in Pittman, and it's the word and, not the symbol. So Pittman and Pittman. The phone number is 608-784-0841. And I'm happy to talk to people on the phone. It seems like as time goes on, more people reach out first through an email, which, to be honest, is kind of nice for me too, because sometimes they have a question and I can send them, hey, take a look at this link, or whatever the case may be. But I think often it's just they're emailing me at 8 o'clock at night and I'm not here, and that's just fine.
I feel you. And then kind of the last thing is kind of like a two-parter, but what can the average citizen do to maybe help protect their neighbor, their brother, their sister from ICE, from getting deported? Is it anything? I mean, we kind of mentioned those educational seminars, for lack of better words, to tell people about their rights. And then the second part of that is there anything we can do as a citizen to help maybe improve the general public's perception of immigrants and immigration? Like, I think what makes America amazing is our diversity. We're a melting pot of different cultures, and that's really beautiful in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the first question, like what people can do to help in their communities, there are some really good resources about know your rights stuff. And I think maybe people think that doesn't matter. It does matter. It does matter that immigration has warrants when they go places. It does matter that they didn't create the warrant themselves, that a judge issued the warrant. And so I think learning about the rights, about searches and seizures, and about the right to remain silent, those things are important. And it's fine, it's fair, it's appropriate to put the government to its paces to make sure the government is correct when it's trying to do these things. The same is true with criminals. I think sometimes people think, oh, this loophole or that loophole. The loophole is the Constitution. The government has all the power in this situation, and they should exercise it appropriately and win. That's fine. That's fine. If they win, okay. But they have to follow the rules, and we should all feel more comfortable when the government has to follow the rules as laid out in the Constitution. That's how we're free. That is how we're free. And then in terms of, I think the other part of the question was, there anything else we could do so that people understand what's going on? I don't really know the answer to that, but I do know that it's important for us to reach out to our representatives and express our views. There was a period of time where I was driving. I'm from Wisconsin, so I was driving by the state capitol in Madison quite a bit, and I would stop every time, and I would go in and I would try to talk to my state representative, because I think that people should be able to get driver's licenses regardless of their immigration status. And in Minnesota, they just passed that rule 4 or 5 months ago. And I would talk to the guy, and I could tell he was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then the next time I would come, and I'd go talk to him again. And then the next time I would come, and he wouldn't be there, and I'd leave a message with his staffer. And the next time I would come, I'd leave another message. And then finally he was like, I'm starting to see what you're getting at here. So I think that
it works.
Yeah, and none of us know everything about everything. There's a lot of stuff I don't understand very well at all. I mean, I don't even understand everything about immigration, not even close. But I know a lot about it, and there's certain things I'm really good at. And if I were going to have to make a decision about I don't know, satellites in outer space, or like electric cars, or a whole bunch. I don't know that much about that stuff. Like, I'd need somebody to say, hey, I know about this. Let me explain to you how it works. And then that would help me form my opinion. And so I think it does matter if we talk to our representatives and share with them our experiences and share with them our concerns, because otherwise they're guessing, the silent majority or whatever. Well, what does that mean? So if we can help them understand things and help them understand where people stand on things, that's really meaningful.
Awesome. Well, that about wraps everything up. I know it's been a long one. I really appreciate your time. I'll put your contact info down in the video description for anyone else that wants to reach out and potentially hire Chuck for any of their issues. With that being said, do you have any final messages?
No, I think we've covered a lot of stuff. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about these things, and I feel like we could come to a better solution. And there's really, the only way to do that is to talk through it and come up with better ways. And, calling people names and screaming about, whatever, is not really helpful on this topic or really any other topic.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for your time, and hit us up with any questions in the comments below.